Twin Souls, Paranormal UK Radio, created by Irene Allen and Mark Johnson, and hosted by myself, Ronnie Consola, along with my twin brother, Philip, in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Our special guests tonight are Neil Geddes-Ward and Andrew Chaplin. Here we discuss all things relating to the Greys. Good evening to you, gentlemen.
Good evening. Good evening. Hello, Ronnie. And hello, Andy, my fellow presenter from the Paranormal Peep Show.
Yes. Hello, Ronnie. Hello, Neil. We seem to have swapped sides, Neil. We've jumped ship in some way.
We've defected.
We've defected.
I'm defected. I'm a defect.
What I wanted to talk about was actually the Greys themselves, because Philip has been put on YouTube recently regarding his wonderful speech on the extraterrestrials, and which was done at the Glastonbury Symposium, which you yourself attended as well, Neil, with the lovely Ronnie. And so I thought it would be interesting if we could discuss about these creatures. I myself personally have never seen one. I mean, Philip has, but I thought we'd like to discuss about perhaps their origins and intentions. The one thing that's very interesting about them, and what I'm seeing on YouTube, and I'm seeing many views, these things may be demonic. Now, what are your views on that, both Neil and Andy? What are your views on that, them being perhaps possibly demonic entities?
I think it's a bit like, the analogy I would use is when you get the there was a case of a Muslim lady in Birmingham that I think Dave Hodrian told me about, who was getting abducted, and there was actually video film of her being removed from her bed at night, and they were coming from their kind of Muslim background culture thinking it was a genie, kind of jinn type thing, because of their culture. And I think what you got is a similar thing here with the Christians, and they're trying to explain these Greys in regards to their religious background, their religious culture. And the only thing that they can come up with is demons, devils, and things like that. They can't seem to explain extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings.
Well, they call them jinn, don't they?
Yeah, jinn in the Middle East, yeah. And over, like the Christians are calling them demons and things. Well, regardless, I think they're trying to interpret them.
I mean, it could be argued, I suppose, that it's different labels for the same thing. I mean, it'd be really interesting to see if there are any medieval reports, medieval period, especially being, the high time of religion and the church ruling with an iron fist, whether there were any reports of demons, so to speak, that had grey features or big black eyes. I mean, certainly there are cave drawings, and there's certainly ancient drawings depicting greys with big heads and black eyes. So yes. I think it goes a lot further back than simply the church kind of like saying it's all demons and elves and things.
But there was that woodcut that was I think it's called the Mowing Devil, which has got a crop circle image, and it's from like the 1600s or something. I can't remember the location.
Oh yeah, it's Hertfulshire. The very first crop circle recorded in Hertfordshire.
Yeah, which is where Andy currently resides. And,
I believe it was Walken, which is a town fairly close to here, and it's very close to me, literally about 8 miles away.
But the very fact it was called a Mowing Devil, again, speaks to the culture of the biblical times and things like that, and so hence the demons, which they're talking about today. So I suppose we're kind of in agreement that we're supposing that most people are regarding these demons, or what they believe the Greys are, as demons. I think it's just their kind of literally the governing thoughts of their Christianity is transposed over to this new thing they've got to cater with.
Yes, the actual engraving. What is the picture of? Is it of a devil or a grey, or
It looked, if I recollect, I can't see it offhand myself, but memory.
It's a lino cut, and it looks like a thin black horned being mowing a crop circle. But don't forget, I think that they saw the after effects of a crop circle, so I don't think they actually saw the devil doing it.
Yeah,
I think that they came across the crop circle and they assumed, well, it must be the devil doing it.
That's right. Either that or Weetabix or something like that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yes. Also, I mean, we have to look at the fact that in the past there were certainly things known as goblins and fairies. Do you think they have evolved as we've evolved? Like at the time, you were talking about medieval times. Did not the people perhaps translate them as being like fairies or goblins? All these things changed their image to suit the style of the time.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's quite possible. I mean, there is reports coming through now where the Greys are masquerading as people's relatives, as people's doctors and things like that. So it's quite possible the Greys of the past were perhaps masquerading either as people's relatives in those times or as the local folk legends. I mean, a lot of people report owls and associate that with alien sightings as well.
That's right.
So it's a little bit clouded on what, whether the fairies are the aliens and things as well. I mean, there's also talk of UFOs masquerading as, planes and things, but they don't quite get the time frame right. And a lot of people have seen UFOs making sounds of Spitfires and things like that, and they appear to be like old wartime planes, and they've masqueraded as vehicles, but the vehicles are not present day vehicles. They're cars from the 1940s and 50s, so they're like 60 years out or something.
Good Lord, that is quite interesting, isn't it? That's very interesting. And also regarding them, and we're going to bring this up about the hybridization program. So we hear about them snatching people up out of the middle of the night and taking them aboard their ship, certainly women, and performing experiments on them, genetic experiments, and impregnating them with, I gather, it's parts of their DNA to give birth to a hybrid. What do you make of this?
Andy?
Oh, God. I mean, this goes in all sorts of directions. I mean, there's some people who believe that they are kind of like not really. They're half plant, half kind of animal. So they're almost like a plankton in a way. That they're kind of like, as you say, these genetically hybrid slave type things. And also, the more I'm listening to reports, including today, because I'm always on the internet listening to interviews, the more I'm realizing there seems to be kind of like an intelligent kind of version of the Greys who know what they're doing, and they're kind of like, you can communicate, and then almost like a robotic slave drone type that hasn't really got a soul or intelligence. They just do stuff, almost like programming a microwave to switch off in 5 minutes, but to a much more nth degree in terms of like taking people from their beds and taking them into UFOs and doing medical stuff. And a lot of kind of abductees say that they have cold, soulless eyes, almost like there's nothing there. And some people have even said that the grey skin and everything and the black eyes is actually an outfit, like a slip-on sort of outfit. And underneath, some people have said they're actually pink and they're like a completely different type of species.
Yes, so I have actually wondered, and I have wondered this, that the actual body of them is like a suit as we would wear in space or underwater, and that the dark coverings on their eyes are actually lenses, which would perhaps betray a little fact or perhaps a little hint that they might come from a darker world or a plane, a level somewhere darker, if they are certainly in these uniforms. And
if people say that they've got very soulless eyes, I mean, try looking at somebody with sunglasses, like with really mirrored sunglasses. You don't see the soul, you don't see the eyes.
No,
it's interesting about the colour. I'll just interject here. I mean, it's not about the hybrid thing, obviously, as the original question was, but it's something that's just occurred to me that, we're talking about the grey colour. I was recently looking into the case of a Canadian called Steve Boucher, who was kidnapped twice or abducted twice. Once when he was a 5-year-old boy, wasn't quite abducted. His dad was taken on board, but he saw it all happen. And this grey or alien sat in the car with him and babysat him as a 5-year-old or 4-year-old boy whilst his dad was taken on board the flying saucer or UFO.
Yeah.
And then many years later, he was about 17. He was a young musician, and he was coming back from a gig. I think it's St. Catharines or heading St. Catharines, which is just off the coast, on the lake side of, I forget the lake now, Ontario, I think, in Canada, with his bandmates one night. And they were basically, taken aboard this landed flying saucer to abbreviate the whole thing. But he said that one of the aliens, and it was a grey, said, I want to, they're very nice, these ones. They weren't bad or anything. It was very pleasant.
Yeah.
He said, would you mind, almost very politely, if we scanned you? And he says, what's that? And he held out something which I suppose we'd describe it looking rather like a kind of mobile phone app type of thing.
Yeah.
And he scanned it, the grey scanned over his own arm, and he said he could see the bone of the grey, interestingly. So when the grey then scanned his arm, he said he could see his own bone through this, but also the muscle and the blood and the arteries. He could even see his pulse going. And he said he was very mystified as to why he couldn't see on the grey when it had scanned himself only the bone. He couldn't see any blood or any tissue or anything. He could only see the bone.
I was literally listening to this guy today.
That's fascinating.
You was, yeah? Oh,
literally exactly the same story. And he said the light was green, and he could see all the tissues and the membranes and the muscle of his own arm, but not the
right.
other.
Yeah. So the grey colour suggests to me, because I mean I've seen dead bodies, and they literally go grey once the blood's gone out of them or whatever it is. And I'm wondering, there's no blood in a grey, maybe.
Good God. Oh. So what you're suggesting is possibly that they're not real, they're dead. They're either dead or robotic. Yes, that's right. How extraordinary. And if they are, then they've obviously been built or made by something. And I've always said to Philip, we've argued all these points. I mean, we have to consider every element. I mean, these are all theories, of course. But I've said to Philip that perhaps we've never seen the true faces of their masters. I mean, if there's a highly advanced race, of course they wouldn't need to come out themselves. If they could build things, they would just transport them out to the actual planet or dimension and leave it to them in their capable hands.
Yeah.
And then give a report back, rather like soldiers. They have the commanders and they have the soldiers. The soldiers go out and you have the fellows that report everything back to the commanders.
It's a much less risky procedure. I mean, if you think when we send a space probe to Mars, the spaceship is always grey anyway. It's just a metal or whatever painted to reflect the light or whatever. It doesn't have to be pretty pink colours or whatever it is. But so maybe it is a kind of soldier. I mean, there was a case of this guy that was chased up a tree where he was stuck out in a really deserty area with a few trees, and I forget where it is. I can't remember the area in America now where it was. In the 60s, I think it was. Yeah. And he climbed up this tree to protect himself from wild animals overnight because he was out hunting. But he thought, no, he's better climb up this tree. Yeah. And I think he was stuck there for whatever reason. He thought he saw a light coming. He thought, oh, it's a helicopter. But it turned out, in fact, to be a UFO. And it landed not far from the tree. And this poor guy, was hassled by these occupants of this UFO for at least 12 hours through the night.
Good Lord.
And because he was a hunter, he had bow and arrows and everything. He was firing bows and arrows down. He said, but two of them appeared to be robots. And the other two appeared to be humanoids, although he didn't say greys, but he said they were grey-looking humanoids. And he said it was hard to tell the height of them because he was looking down at them. But he said they were about 4 or 5 feet, he felt they were. But the robots appeared to be a bit larger. And the descriptions or the illustrations I saw that represent the robots rather looked like the Warner Brothers feature film of Iron Giant with a robotic head and 2 round eyes, which is interesting.
By Ted Hughes, yes, the book by Ted Hughes, The Iron Giant, yes. Yeah. Also, like Gort from The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Well, it's interesting because Gort has only one eye, hasn't he, that goes across, a bit like a Cylon Centurion out of Battlestar Galactica. Whereas these two robots in this story of this guy up the tree, they both had 2 eyes, which suggests stereoscopic vision. You think, why would a robot need stereoscopic vision, maybe?
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. I've never heard of that, actually. There's a few cases I hadn't heard of. I do know that in regard to Betty and Barney Hill, which I absolutely believe they were captured by a UFO I believe it was the 50s. I mean, I've read the book, but I can't remember all the details. But I do know that they lost time and they recalled the memories. And these were greys, and they were uniform. They were quite sophisticated because they had it all planned where they took them on board the ship and then they performed experiments on Betty and on Barney. And the one thing that intrigued me about this case is the fact that when they had Betty in the operating theatre and Barney, he was separate, one of the examiners came rushing in to the one she called the leader who was with her, and was very excited, and he rushed straight to Betty and he tried to pull her teeth out. And she said, "What on earth are you doing?" And he said, "Well, why don't your teeth come out?" Well, Barney had false teeth. They were absolutely thrown by this. So this actually confirms to me that it was so incredible. And then they actually landed their ship, like the chap in the tree. Their ship landed. And this was recorded by military. They knew something had come down, so it corroborated their story. But this came down like in the traditional method, where it actually landed and they stopped the car and they approached it and took them out. They weren't horrible to them. It was just very frightening for Betty and Barney. But it seems to me as time goes on, they've upped their program, or they've upped their techniques, because now they don't land, they just snatch people out of their beds at night. So no wonder people consider them to be quite demonic. I mean, I myself have never seen a grey. I've never seen one, but I do believe in them. I've always had a fascination for them, more so now than before. It's quite interesting. But on the subject of demons, I mean, this seems to be very popular, especially in America, I suppose, because a lot of them are Catholic or Christians out there. They do believe they're demonic. I came up with a theory, and it's a wild card. It really is. But my theory was that this hybridization program they're performing, perhaps they're trying to perfect something. Perhaps they're trying to perfect an incarnation of something. And since they considered them to be demons, would it be possible? I said to Philip, we laughed about it, but it's just a theory. It's that perhaps they're trying to perfect the Antichrist. We hear about I think you knew that was coming. we keep hearing about this Prince of Darkness arriving from the underworld. Perhaps these are like demons perfecting their techniques on us to see how they can bring him into the physical perfectly. So that was a theory that I had about them. But I think with this subject, we have to consider every aspect, whether they're from another planet, whether they're from the underworld, whether they're from a dimension. Because to be honest with you, let's be realistic, we have got no idea. I do know they're real. I mean, the masses of cases we've heard, surely there is some truth to this. And of course, we have the Roswell crash as well. I mean, that happened in 1947, I believe, in New Mexico. So it's very interesting when you consider all options. And I think the sad thing about people is, not all of them, but it's like if you mention one element of it, they are in for the kill. No, this is not what it's about. But they don't know. They don't know. No great researcher in the world can tell you. But it is always good to theorize on what they could possibly be, where they come from, and what they want. I will tell you that I think an author called Georgina Bruni, I think her name was. She's passed now, bless her.
I remember her book, You Can't Tell the People, it was
yes,
called, wasn't it? Yeah.
That line was from Margaret Thatcher. She was actually at a party or a conference, and she just willed herself to approach the PM. And she actually said to her, "Can you tell me anything about these UFOs?" And the Prime Minister surprisingly looked at her and said, "Right." She said, "Firstly, you need to get your facts right." Well, she knew she couldn't because we can't get the facts. And she said, "When you do, that's when you'll understand why we can't tell the people." Now, to my mind, that doesn't sound very good. It's as if they are hiding something. They know something quite bad about these entities, something that's not very nice. And perhaps it could be possible that the military themselves know something. I mean, we shouldn't give them such a hard time. Perhaps they're aware of something quite horrible about them, and they perhaps feel it's in our best interest not to know. That's the idea I got from Georgina Bruni from her book. What are your thoughts on that?
With the military, I'd say, well, it kind of depends which faction of them and which department we're talking about, because I know for a fact that there are people, including myself, who've been harassed by black helicopters. I suppose it could be argued that that might not even be military. It could be kind of dark UFOs portraying themselves as helicopters. But a lot of people I know have got this kind of harassment thing going on. And certainly people like Tony Topping have had actual other kind of harassment from human beings. So there is certainly a dark either shadow government or shadow military element to this. That's not to say the regular everyday soldiers, because I don't think that is the case. I think it's more the case of a dark faction that has got some kind of protocol or standing orders to go out and basically ruin people's lives that come into contact with UFOs. Yeah. And also another thing, and you'll probably agree with this, Ronnie, is that hand in hand with the UFO thing, you often get the poltergeist, the spirits, and the ghosts thing.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I know somebody actually recently, I won't name her, but she's actually seen a UFO recently, had quite an interesting encounter. She was chasing it with her then partner at the time, who will remain anonymous at the moment, along the A414 from Harlow to Ware, which is quite close to me. And they saw this kind of big round object in the sky kind of moving. Now, we live quite close to Stansted Airport and Heathrow and Luton and Gatwick, which are major airports within the southeast. So we're well aware of what a plane looks like. We know what a helicopter looks like. We know what planes with what their wingtip colours, the way they flash, the way they move. This, they said, was something very different. It was low down, and here's the clue in terms of it possibly not being a helicopter or a plane. It was erratic. It wasn't circling coming into land. It was kind of moving and then stopping and then going back on itself and then stopping and then going down and then going up. And they said it had like a big white light that is brighter than kind of normal plane lights and helicopter lights. They said it had red and green lights as well, which you could say is kind of like almost like the wingtips of planes. But they said it was round and it was too big. Now, I'm thinking not necessarily alien, but it could be an experimental man-made craft or something of that nature.
Right.
But it gets weirder. So they're following this thing, and they kind of follow it towards Hunsdon, and they pull over at the side of the road, and they kind of lose touch with it because it goes beyond where they can actually drive. The weird part then becomes these vehicles start driving past them, and these men start asking them odd questions. And they said that there was a Porsche that pulled over with a man in a tweed suit that spoke really posh, and two men in black. Not men in black as in suits. They were wearing black outfits with hats, slouched in the back, trying not to be noticed, trying to almost like don't see us, don't view us, kind of keeping their heads down. Whilst this man in the tweed was asking, "What are you doing? What are you doing?"
Oh my God! Lord.
Now they then kind of basically abruptly said, "No, we're all right, mate. We're cool." And so they drove off. Eventually, my friend and her partner decided to go back in the car and drive off. They noticed this vehicle then following them. So they decided to do a classic military thing, which is kind of loop the track, which is you go back on yourself to kind of like throw somebody off the trail. And anyone in the military would know what that's about.
It's rather like lightning never strikes twice in the same place.
Yeah.
Or hopefully.
So this vehicle continued to follow them, and then apparently a van got involved, and they were driving along, and this van started following them. So it all got a bit bizarre. They got completely freaked out. They actually recorded it on video. And I'll have to ask my friend whether she wants to make that known. It is actually on her Facebook page, but I won't name her for the moment. But she did several clips of the video, and she took some photos of this thing as well. And it's just a little bit of a mystery. At the same time as this is another strange thing, Ronnie. One of my very close psychic friends who I've met recently, who will remain anonymous again, had a dream about a black helicopter with some kind of drone kind of recording her. This was in her dream, and she messaged me today, and she said instantly, as soon as she went out of her flat, her son said helicopter, and she looked up and it was a black military helicopter outside her house.
It's as if somehow, going back to your friends in the car that were tailing this UFO, it seems to me that somehow there's something very odd going on, because there is always people, more than not, ready in vans or cars to then question them as if they knew what was going to happen. Do they have any foresight of this? These people, these agents, these dark agents, I will call them, because they are. I mean, they are. Yes, do they have foresight of what this is? As if they knew it was going to happen, and as if they knew these people were going to see the UFO. It's extraordinary, isn't it? I've heard this many times.
It is. Now, I mean, when you start thinking about it logically, Ronnie, it's insane because, okay, let's say it's an experimental military aircraft, which it may well be. Let's say it's the CIA or NSA or whoever it is in Area 51 testing it, and they might have a division in the UK, that they're testing it. Why test it in the most busiest place you could possibly imagine, which is just north of London, where literally thousands of people, possibly millions of people, could see this going on? It's obviously not a helicopter. It's obviously not a plane. So people, if they did see it, if they did clock it, they wouldn't be thinking helicopter or plane. They'd be thinking that's something very strange and odd.
But if I can just interject, you are near Stansted, and so the people concerned might have said that doesn't look like a traditional plane to us. But most people who are just doing their normal things, not even interested in UFOs, would unconsciously see. Well, it's like the Belgian UFO wave, isn't it? A lot of people saw that over Belgium in the 1990s. Over military places and things like that. And I suppose if you are going to test something secret in a way, it's always good to test it near an airport, because that way people say, "Oh, I saw some lights," and then you've got an instant excuse. Oh, it's just the aeroplanes, you see.
But why not do it in the Outer Hebrides? This is the thing. It's almost as if there's a
no landing strips.
but the thing is, it's almost like there's an agenda within agenda. The agenda, I don't think, was testing the plane or whatever the aircraft was. The agenda, I think, was testing people's reaction to it, or if we put this out there, what will be the reaction from the public? Will tons of people freak out like a War of the Worlds scenario, or will people just think, oh, it's just a plane, and just ignore it? And the knock-on effect from that would be kind of like, what would be the next roll-on thing from that, from the data that they get from people's reactions or non-reactions to that?
Hypothetically, if it's an alien technology, back-end engineered or whatever, they're still perhaps trying to get to grips with it. And so maybe if it's interdimensional or something like that, it could be that it's just like, it's almost like it's got a free will and it's just going off on its own and they can't control it. So it ends up in places where you don't want it. It's like a dog on a lead that's run off the lead, and you're thinking, oh, crikey, we're going to get in trouble, this one. So that's why there's loads of people that are rushing around in cars, literally trying to watch where it's going, like chasing a balloon in the summer or something.
It's really interesting you say that, Neil, because there are some people who say that there is an AI technology that the aliens have, or some ETs have. Alex Collier goes into this, and I think Simon Parkes talks about this. And apparently sometimes it's exactly that, because these AI ships have a mind of their own. The idea being to be as technologically advanced as possible to traverse time and space and maybe dimensions. But sometimes this AI technology goes, I'd like to go over here, actually. It just kind of zooms off on its own accord.
Well, that's the thing. If we're getting self-driverless cars in the next few years, God knows where they'll be driving to.
That's a bad idea.
I actually do think that it would be far too risky for them to test prototypes over civilian airspace. Really would. I don't buy that at all. I think this is something which you said it is beyond their control. They have no control of it. They know or anticipate it's going to be there. The Roswell incident took them by complete surprise. In fact, if it wasn't for the chap, the rancher, they would never have known it had crashed, But with these things, flying them over civilian airspace, even experimental class, they've got plenty of room on the planet. There's plenty of room.
I know.
I just don't buy that myself personally. Although people are entitled to their opinions, I don't buy it. Nothing.
Although you mentioned the Roswell there, Ronnie, and there's reports that apparently the lots of aircraft UFOs are brought down with back then the new radar technology of the 1940s. Right. Now, if you think you've got Stansted Airport near you, Andy, that's got radar and that sort of stuff. Maybe the radar technology extends further than we realise, and it does cause these things to go off. And so therefore you are getting these UFOs come into your airspace where you're not expecting it, because somehow it's lost the guidance system or something.
Yes.
I speak to a lot of people within the kind of like the psychic and the spiritual community, and it does seem to be the psychically, spiritually aware people who have the black helicopters and the weird UFO stuff. And funnily enough, another thing that this person said to me that saw this with her partner, they said after this UFO strange craft thing then eventually flew off, then came a black helicopter, and it did start kind of circling around. This is different, by the way, from the friend who saw it in Hartford. That's a different friend and a different helicopter. Right. So whether they're connected or not, I don't know. But it's very interesting. And I've heard many reports that after alleged UFO incidents, then you get the black helicopters. It's almost like the black helicopters are playing catch up. You don't see them beforehand, you don't see them during, you see them after, almost like a cleanup type operation.
Yes.
Interesting you say cleanup as well, because some UFO reports suggest that they drop material like a molten metal sometimes.
Oh.
So maybe black helicopters are not there just to sort of spy on who's looking at them, but literally they're perhaps tracking parts of debris that they've literally got to clean up.
Very interesting.
Yes. There's also another thing that makes me curious, going back to this hybrid program, which alleged hybrid program. It's the fact that a superior race of aliens, I don't think they would be breeding a new kind of species, because it would be rather like us going back to the Stone Age men and impregnating the women with our own DNA. I mean, what's the point in that? I just don't understand the logic behind that at all. I mean, I can't work out why a superior race of intelligence would come here and, in terms of creating a new race, and impregnate cave women with their DNA, unless it's just a scientific experiment. I don't think...
for a new series of Jeremy Kyle?
But you see where I'm coming from, the point I'm trying to make. I mean, why would they bother doing that? And of course, we wouldn't be used as slaves for them. You know, like you hear these stories about people saying that the aliens are going to enslave us. They wouldn't need to. If they could build robots so advanced they could build workers for them, rather like a bee with her workers, they wouldn't need us as slaves unless it was for something else. Well, I think Kenneth Johnson's covered that, food, but I don't think that at all. I just don't understand why they are coming here.
Sorry, Ronnie, could it be what they're really after is kind of like a DNA library or a DNA farm? Imagine how humans view kind of like almost extinct animals and like a zoo. Imagine if you could kind of preserve a dodo or preserve, you know, a range of species so they don't become extinct. Maybe this entire planet is a DNA library that they can pick out of, you know, like picking a book out the library. Oh, we'll have a bit of DNA of that, bit of DNA of that, and you know, tinkering it to try and perfect themselves.
Yes, that is lovely. That's actually done in Arthur C. Clarke's book, beautiful book I've read 3 times, or I think I've read it quite a number of times, Childhood's End. They've actually made a mini-series of it where the aliens come to Earth and they bestow goodwill upon mankind and make it easy for him, but there is a price to pay. Now Carellon, the leader of this, I loved him. He's like your granddad, but they didn't look anything like people. I mean, the reason why they hid themselves is because, well, you'd understand, I wouldn't spoil it for the listeners, but they were collecting samples, animals and things like that. But I'm just wondering more if these things could perhaps have created us. Is it possible that they are the creators of us and they're coming back to look upon their progeny?
There's certainly creation myths if you go back through, you know, the Old Testament and beyond that, you know, the books that inspired the Old Testament, the old Torah of the ancient Hebrews and things like that. They talk of giants and stuff like that, don't they?
Did you know that in the Old Testament, there's been a mistranslation? It was not God, it was the guards in Hebrew. In the original Hebrew, it was the guards.
Good Lord. I mean, I don't want to open up a spiritual argument with the religious people, because I do understand and I would never stand on their beliefs. I respect them. But I think some people are tunnel vision with it, others are not. And I do admire the people who are not, because they're trying to look for answers based on these things. You know, why are they here? what are they doing and what do they want? And they're very elusive. They like shadows. They hide, and everything they do is like very, very suspicious. It's like it's really nasty, really, isn't it?
I mean, I was going to say Genesis. It sounds like the 7 days of creation of Genesis sounds a typical science fiction terraforming scenario, doesn't it?
Yes, that's true.
I mean, David Icke and Jordan Maxwell have spoken to rabbis, and these rabbis agree. They say you're right. It is the guards. They don't deny it. They're not saying, oh no, that's anti-Semitic. You can't say that. They're saying yes, actually, it is the guards. And I think Jordan Maxwell asked, why don't you tell the people? And I think the answer was something along the lines of either the people aren't ready to hear, or they, we've just got to kind of stick to what we're told. Maybe they're not ready to learn this kind of information.
It's gone too far down that road of misunderstanding to turn the wheel round now, basically.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think people are ready yet, and I don't think they will be. The likes of us would be. I mean, if they arrived in their ships all over the planet like we see on these films, I would be a little bit, guarded. I wouldn't be running in terror like we see on Independence Day, because you'd have to hear them out. I mean, they're going to blow you up. They're going to blow you up. I don't think they would. I think they would come to offer something first. Of course, things like that, the breaking in is always done gently, isn't it, before the crunch?
Before the pen of doom, yeah.
Pen of doom, yes. I mean, I do know that this is very controversial, this topic, and as I have to reiterate, I do respect all religious beliefs. We cannot break them, although some of them try and break ours. They call us nuts or cranks. But the thing is, if they look around, it's actually going on. I mean, and they change their tune when they see something themselves. I mean, I've been no end of times called, things like a liar, or you're deceiving yourself, or, you worship the devil, which I certainly don't. I wouldn't want to make a pact with him. I can tell you that now, because I do. But the thing is that there's definitely something going on. I'll never forget a chap who was very religious, and I was talking to him many years ago about the Greys and the reptilians and, of course, UFOs. And he was absolutely adamant it was demonic. He told me that I'm tainted, that I'm actually playing with fire. And I said, I'm not. I'm just curious. He said, nope. And he said, basically, I'll burn in damnation. How could you burn in damnation when God has given you the will of curiosity? See what I mean? How can you be punished for questioning things that are quite supernatural? And another thing that gets me is the fact that in the Bible, I mean, they talk to burning bushes. Yes, and Moses can part the ways. Isn't that not as fantastical as aliens visiting our world at present?
You could ask that man, do you believe in occult rituals? He will say, no, I'm a good Christian. I don't believe in occult rituals. Okay, what about drinking the blood of Christ? Isn't that symbolic vampirism? What about eating the body of Christ? Isn't that symbolic cannibalism? And then watch his jaw drop. There's no answer to that. That's a cult ritual. Yeah. And then ask him, do you believe in God? He'll say yes. Well, then you believe in the supernatural.
Absolutely. You see, they're cornered.
So,
God is supernatural. That's right.
And isn't the Holy Trinity something along the lines of the Father, the Son, and the Holy? What was it?
The Holy Ghost.
Oh yes, the Holy Ghost. Yes, that's it.
Now, an interesting thing, getting back to the Greys, is that one of the things I found out interesting about this Steve Belcher case, that was a Canadian musician who had the experience. I think it must have been in the early 70s. When he was 17, this is the same chap whose father was taken on board the craft when he was about 4 years old, and he sat in the car.
Oh, and these were the polite ones, weren't they?
Yes, yeah, and basically, because he was a musician, he carried his flutes. He had these wooden flutes in his bag, and he said these flutes went everywhere with me. He didn't let anyone touch them, and so even when he was asked to go aboard this craft with his fellow musicians, he took his bag of flutes on board. But it doesn't end there, because when they asked him to get undressed, and he said, what about my flutes? And the alien Grey said, you can put that there. No one's going to touch it, and you can see it whilst we examine you. So they examined him, and afterwards he got up, and he said he was walking back out of the UFO, and this guy, Steve, he took out one of his flutes, and he sort of showed it to the in-charge alien, the leader, and he said, I want to show you this. And he looked at it inquisitively, the alien, and he said, what is it? And he said, well, it's an instrument, you play it. And so this guy played a few notes from it, you see. Yeah. And so he handed it, the alien took it, and he actually wondered whether the alien was he a ghost or was he physical? He said that he could feel the pull of this alien taking the flute from his hand. So he thought, yeah, he's definitely a physical being.
Yeah.
So he took the flute, and he said what surprised him most about this particular incident, instead of the alien copying him and putting the flute to his mouth, he said he stuck it up his nostril and blew through it. And he thought, how bloody odd is that sort of thing?
Yeah.
And he said it wasn't until a few years later he was reading a book by UFO author Leonard Stringfield, I think his name was, who apparently was reporting on alien autopsies, and they had apparently done an alien autopsy of a grey at some point, where it kind of basically said that the grey's mouth just ends up in a box. It doesn't go down into a tube, into the lungs or into a stomach. It literally is just a chamber below their mouth. It doesn't go anywhere.
Rather cosmetic.
But the nostrils actually go down a tube into lungs or something. So this is why it made sense to him later. This is why the alien that blew his flute blew it through his nose.
Yes, it's as if he was copying what he did. The alien watched him do it, and the only way he could do it was through his air passage,
But he wasn't quite James Galway.
I think I do actually believe that, because when people are captured by them, certainly in the past, and they're taken aboard their ship, yes, first of all they're horrified, but they seem to acclimatise to their atmosphere. Their fear goes, and it's more curiosity, and especially with Betty Hill, a little bit of anger as well, because the leader had promised to give her this type of book, which had, star maps in, I think, or some kind of jargon in it. And he said, well, why do you want it? And she said, well, I need to show the people of the world this is proof. Well, he said yes, but later on, she was denied it. There was discussion about it when they'd done their experiments and they were going to get them off the ship. He took it back, and she was furious. And I have seen the film with James Earl Jones, the wonderful James Earl Jones, the old colour film, The Interrupted Journey. I don't know what it was called. It was called that, where they done their reconstruction of the events with Betty and Barney Hill. And she turned around when she left the ship. She said, you can try and make me forget this, but I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. So they did have a way of trying to wipe their minds to a degree. They've obviously succeeded, but of course they couldn't keep it long term, because these memories started to resurface with them both. I mean, Barney unfortunately didn't live long enough, but I think he was more traumatized by it than Betty was, because he was more or less out of it, but Betty was the one that they were curious about. And another thing that fascinates me about the Betty and Barney House case with the Greys is that when she was on board the ship, she said, well, where'd you come from? And this is another thing that interested me. He showed her a map. He said, where are you on this map? She said, I don't know. He said, well, what's the point of me telling you where we are? I thought that was very interesting.
She did remember the map of sorts, and she drew it. And
that's right.
Some astronomer lady, I forget her name, spent about 4 or 5 years constructing. This is before 3D software and everything. She had to use little beads to make a construction of possible star maps till it eventually matched up to what Betty Hill had described.
That's right.
And then they managed to work it out, that they were talking about the
reticuli.
Yes, reticuli, which is about how many? I can't remember how many light years away it is.
I can't remember. It's a star. It's a constellation. Yes, she was right. And actually, because at the time they said no, it's ridiculous, but then they found out it's actually correct. That the map was correct. She said they were quite benevolent, although it was frightening for them, but they did try and masquerade as people. I believe they wore caps, and didn't
they have a Nazi-style uniform?
That's right.
Yes,
that's it. I think that was very interesting, and there's many elements in that absolutely confirmed to me that those two were abducted against their will, and the aliens had a very clever way of making it dreamlike afterwards. But of course, as I said, they couldn't shatter the illusion of actually thinking it was a dream. At the time, but then they woke up and realized that what they had been through was a traumatic encounter with extraterrestrials, and they were the classic Greys.
Of course, and interestingly, it's probably one of the first accounts of the Greys that we've got in modern history, at least.
Yes.
But they were coming down through Canada, interestingly enough, because I mentioned our Canadian Steve Boucher with his alien encounters some years later, maybe about 15 years later, but he was in Canada, and they were coming down through Canada over the border, and I think it happened near Medicine Hat, I believe, in the early hours of the morning. And of course, they're about 4 hours late back to their house in the United States, but they were crossing over the border, and the actual incident occurred just south or north of this place called Medicine Hat, if I recollect.
Right. I can't remember the details, but it was a fascinating. I mean, I've read John G. Fuller's book from cover to cover, The Interrupted Journey, and I've seen the film, and I was privileged enough to be in touch for a brief time with Betty's niece, Kathleen Marden, who is also an author of UFO books, along with the wonderful Stanton Friedman. So I was in with her for a while, and I actually did some drawings of the aliens for her, but she did turn around and say to me that they were she said they look quite menacing, where she'd done her own illustration of them, which of course you have to respect. That would be more like them. They were much more benevolent looking. I'd done them quite evil looking, like I usually do with my images. But yes, very interesting. But the fact of the matter is that with these greys, I mean, I think even today, we have to have open minds about whether they're spiritual, whether they're, I meant from a spiritual dimension, whether they're demonic, whether they're from another planet or another dimension. I mean, I've read so many cases and I've seen so many films on YouTube. A lot of it is fake, unfortunately, but there are the good ones. You get the gems where they theorize. But you notice that any theory broadcast or illustrated is always attacked by God knows how many people who are so closed-minded who can't come to the terms that we are not the only beings in existence. One thing that does amaze me is the fact that they all holler and shout rubbish, everything like that. But do you know, we haven't got a clue what we're in, and that's space. We haven't got a clue where it ends. If it's infinite, and I said this before, even at school, we're taught of the Big Bang. The universe started with a Big Bang. And then you raise your hand and think, well, what caused the Big Bang? Don't question, boy, it just happened. That's what they used to say, don't question, it just happened. It was the will of God. But you question so many things, what was there before that? Who created God? I mean, I think it's the chicken and the egg, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's this thing about the holographic universe where it's all a big illusion anyway. And really, if anyone's able to create an illusion, it probably is people like the Greys. We have this idea of the past and the future, and it all seems like, oh, yeah, we've got this happening and that happening. But in fact, the whole thing, we could be in just one big chicken run for their benefit. And, what we appear to be in is our little world with galaxies and planets and things like that. It all seems kind of cozy. But in fact, we're just in one big holographic laboratory, and they put their hands into that little lab and poke around with us when they need to, kind of thing.
I have heard that they also believe they could be time travelers. I have heard rumors that perhaps it's possible that they are us in the future. Now, I find that very hard to believe. I'm not discounting it, but I don't know. I'm not too sure about that. But there's many theories as to their origins. I mean, we do know they're real. I mean, the thing that blew the whistle for me was the fact that the military, reading the books on Roswell, they immediately said that it was a flying saucer. They had captured a flying saucer. They broadcast this, and then all of a sudden they realized the implications and then said, oh no, hang on a minute, what crashed was a weather balloon. Now, I find it very hard to believe that they sent half the military around one of these blasted weather balloons, and you have a picture of one of the military personnel holding up some tin foil, and they're laughing. And I thought, no, you've covered up something very major there. And I believe they were the Greys, weren't they? The Roswell crash.
Well,
they were Greys.
Supposedly one of the survivors of the Roswell crash, it led on to a later story, which was the Project Serpico. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Well, supposedly where the alien survived the Roswell crash, so the story goes, is that negotiations are later made where his rescuers from the planet, wherever he came from, could come later on and land at designated coordinates, and then later on after that, they were going to do some sort of like personnel from our planet. I think there's 12 of them. Were going to go on board the craft and go back to their planet. Take about 10 years or something like that. I can't remember the time frame now. Which was the whole inspiration for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. At the end sequence, where you see Richard Dreyfuss and all the other people go on board the mothership. Well, that particular sequence was taken from Project Serpico or Journey to Planet Serpico, where these people went at the I think it was JFK authorized it apparently, and it took them about 15 years to come back, and they didn't come back until about 1972 or 73, and that was all really stems from supposedly the Roswell crash.
Oh, right. I suppose if they did return, they'd be under the strictest guard here, wouldn't they? I suppose to learn what these beings were and where they came from, you know. And of course, I wouldn't feel very comfortable about going in a ship back to their planet because our scientists are very fond of dissecting things. So,
well, yeah, apparently the people, once they got to Planet Serpico, I mean, they were obviously trying to adapt to it. It had twin suns, and they wanted to go somewhere. They asked them to build a place where they could go where they wouldn't be so hot, and they built them somewhere on the southern part of the planet where they could live for a few years, where it was less hot. And one day, one of the humans that was repatriated there, they killed a snake-like creature, and the Greys, or the aliens, or whatever you want to call them, were really, really upset by this. So, maybe, if they're upset by that, when we're getting Greys poking around with us down here and doing whatever they want, you start to wonder, are they the same Greys? And I get the feeling that, like Philip has said, that there's perhaps different elements to them, ones that haven't got a soul and some that maybe have.
Yes, I mean, we have different countries here, don't we? We have different religions and different beliefs, different factions of them, you mean? Yes, of course, most certainly. That's quite possible. I mean, there are cases where you hear they've been very nasty, even cutting people up, I believe. Some of them have reported, haven't they?
Yeah, the human mutilation cases.
That's right.
A lot of people know about the animal mutilations, but there have actually been human carcasses found in trees. And
they don't even put the wrappers in the bin afterwards.
I mean, I suppose you could say if a random alien came to came to planet Earth and decided, was the human race good or bad? Well, you could have a look at the Nazi Holocaust, or you could have a look at Buddha, Jesus, and Gandhi.
Yes,
are humans good or bad? It depends on the faction. It depends if they're psychopathic nutters hell bent on genocide, or they're people who just like stroking kittens.
Yes. It depends on their judgment of our history. Yes, as well. I mean, when we build things like the atomic bomb, I should think there would be cause for concern on their behalf.
Now, that's an interesting one, Ronnie. That's a really interesting one, because a lot of people are saying, since we started playing around with nuclear, since we started playing around with the atomic bomb, this is when the majority of the Greys started coming to Earth, or the sightings of them suddenly started.
Yes, that's right. Actually, you're correct on that. I mean, didn't Jim Mars state in his book, "Oh God, they found the matches"?
That's right, exactly that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, yes, that's Andy. That's quite right, because yes, after those atomic explosions, we began to see an influx of these things. Kenneth Arnold, I believe, saw the fleet of them, didn't he? The boomerang type ships he's flying from his aircraft,
Which, interestingly, a description of the ships, he said they weren't round saucer ships, but they had wings, which also closely matched the description of the downed Roswell craft. Sorry to get there.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I do believe something crashed there, and I believe they did retrieve bodies, and they hushed it all up and covered it all up, and they took them away for experiments, like the dissecting and all that. But I believe perhaps one did survive. I mean, you have so many cases from old retired military personnel who actually witnessed them, who saw the bodies, and they saw the ship. I believe it was quite small, the ship, wasn't it? And it wasn't a perfect saucer. The big illusion we're made to believe, it wasn't actually a flying saucer. It was more like a stealth fighter ship.
That's right, like a flying wing type of device.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
How incredible. Very fascinating.
Yeah. Which suggests it's probably not designed for outer space, but more for atmospheric flying. So it must have come from maybe a close-by base, because there are, again, going back to the Canadian Steve Boucher, he said, "Where do you come from?" And he said, "We come from such and such a star system." And one of his people, one of the other musicians that was abducted as well at the same time, said, "Do you have bases here on Earth?" And he says, "Yes, in fact, we have one on Lake Ontario." Although he didn't call it Lake Ontario, he said, "We have one out there, in fact." And he pointed to Lake Ontario, which is where St. Catharines is, the town they're from.
Well, so Neil, remind me the guy's name, because I literally saw the interview like either today or yesterday.
Steve Boucher, which is, I think it's Boucher.
Steve Boucher.
I'll have to look them up. Yes, that's.
I've been requested on Facebook actually. So
yes, I would think they would have bases here. Yes, of course they would if they're outposts, And the one thing that makes me laugh, and I've got to say this, is that you get the clever clogs who say, "Well, if they were so advanced, how could they crash their ship?" Well, not being unkind, and this is dreadful for me to say this, but it's an absolute fact. Do not our own aircrafts crash? Even our space shuttles explode. Sometimes accidents do happen. As the lovely Discovery Channel says, accidents don't just happen. They're a chain of events, But so these things could have been brought down by the modern radar that was completely something so simple, had a devastating effect on their own instruments, which brought them down. I believe there were 2 that came down. Allegedly 2, weren't there somewhere else?
They were either flying in formation or one ejected from the other craft. I'm not quite clear on that, but one landed about 5 or 6 miles away, and it wasn't discovered until a few years later by an archaeology team, if I understand that.
And as Andy rightly pointed out, it's always by military bases. So after the atomic bombs, they expressed interest in the military bases, didn't they? They even now, today, they're flying their ships over them and they're analysing.
And they're always crashing near the military bases because they're using their radars. Because, of course, there was a battle of 1942 where a UFO flew down the coastline of Los Angeles. And the Americans, I don't think were in the war at that particular point, but they were close to it. And all hell let fire on this flying saucer as they shot it going up and down the coast of Los Angeles and towards San Francisco. And they were shooting it at it all night, but it made no dent on this craft. So, of course, once they found that radar or that kind of thing worked on them, they were bringing it down in droves.
Yes, that's right. Well, it's been an absolutely fascinating subject. And I want to thank you both very much for coming on to our radio show. I'd just like to remind the listeners that Andy and Neil have their own radio show called The Peep Show. Would you like to...
The Paranormal Peep Show,
Yep.
Yes, and we go out once a month, usually the third Wednesday of every month between 8 and 10 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. That's the Paranormal Peep Show.
That's lovely.
And we're also on Facebook, so if anyone's listening, jump onto Facebook, look up Paranormal Peep Show, and we're quite welcome to take questions. If you want to question me or Neil or just start a discussion, you're quite welcome to.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. And I'd just like to thank Andrew Chaplin and Neil Geddes-Ward for their wonderful time tonight. And we hope to see you again soon. And from me, thank you very much. And from my brother Philip and from Twin Souls, good night.
Good night.
Thank you.